Welcome to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection, where we explore the people, ideas, trends, and innovations shaping the structural framing industry. Regardless of how you touch this industry, we're glad you're here. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, this is Ashley Baker, the Director of Education for SBCA, and I'll be your host for this episode of Component Connection. I'm joined by me. That's right. Ashley Baker, Director of Education for SBCA. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about education and training. 2026 is all about building a connected learning ecosystem that actually fits how component manufacturers operate across plants, offices, roles, and yes, even across different learning systems. And that is actually one of the biggest shifts coming in 2026. So if you're interested, stay tuned all the way through the end of this episode. But before we get there, of course, we need to understand how we got here. So we want to give you a little bit of quick context. So 2025 obviously was a foundational year, as I mentioned. January of 2025 marked the launch of the new SBCA Academy, which replaced our old LMS. And this brought a really modern system that was built for flexibility, scalability, real-world use. You could access any module, any pathway, any training on any device from anywhere. And that launch did a few critical things. It clearly separated education, which is free, from training, which is paid and often certification-based. It also introduced micro-learning modules and pathways that we built in Articulate. It also eliminated seat caps. So, we can include as many learners as we want without any excess charges, which is significant for the association and for our learners. It also added company and location-based portals with manager oversight. And it integrated directly with Novi to automate purchasing and enrollments. And here's the key part. People use it. We saw strong enrollments and completion data across both modules and pathways and training, which validated that the structure is actually working, especially in busy environments. Heading into 2026, the question became clear. How do we take something that works and make it even easier to use at scale? And that's where the 2026 roadmap came into play, and where we really started looking at, what we want to focus on within the academy. First and foremost, it is about time we are going to update our truss technician training levels 2 and 3, both of which will include modernized exams. We'll also be featuring long span truss education, floor truss fire performance education. We're going to modernize the financial concepts training that also currently exists on our website, but it will be rebuilt within our academy and follow our current structure, which are micro-learning modules. And then we're going to eventually include the B-Series documents as part of the BCSI guide that we loaded just a few months ago. We're hoping to also include wall panel education that will integrate ARSO and connect to the BCSI framework and course. And then we are going to include some initial development within what we're looking at calling our component executive certification. Of course, we will continue our OQM and BCMC education, but we're going to take sort of a different approach for what that will look like in 2026. And we'll get more into that here in a few minutes. The biggest thing that I am most excited about is, of course, our LMS crossover and integration. That too, we will cover, and I'm going to keep you on your toes. That's going to be here at the end. So let's dig in. First thing I want to focus on is TTT2, and then, of course, TTT3 and those updates. So TTT is our truss technician training. We already updated level 1. That is existing. We updated that exam in 2025 as well. It's all online, including a retake exam, both of which offer flexibility, incredible resources to look back on. And then, of course, training that is modernized and much easier to complete and in much less time. Updating 2 and 3, of course, matters more than people sometimes realize. And it's not about just onboarding or bringing in somebody new or trying to elevate their training or, get them to a certain point. It's really about, the technician themselves, being able to educate them in a way that, of course, makes sense so that they can troubleshoot problems before anything escalates. They better understand how design decisions affect production quality. There's a bridge built, between communication and various departments. And the goal is ultimately that, individuals in these roles can become, kind of informal leaders on the floor even. The goal is for the updates for these 2 programs to, of course, modernize the workflow and, fulfill the same micro-learning format that we included in TTT1. But we also really need some updates. Right now, it is a video. They're lengthy videos. They take a really long time to complete, and it's outdated information. So updating, with current codes, field realities, standards, that have changed over the years. Really hoping that we can see a stronger alignment between, a truss technician and those on the production side. And the exams are going to follow suit, of course, as well. So less recall, more scenarios, more real world problem solving. And that's where our technical director, Greg Greenlee, is incredibly helpful. He builds out the vast majority of those exams so that they're relevant, they're realistic, they're, again, scenario based. You look at what a technician does and they don't work in a test environment. So a test environment isn't going to work, when you're learning the content either or trying to advance your career. We also know time is limited. Decisions matter. Mistakes obviously are expensive. So if TTT1 teaches the language and some of the basics, TT2 and 3 are going to take that one step further. So there's more teaching on, judgment and involvement in sort of what processes and things look like and how design can really impact things significantly. And that is ultimately, if you think about it, where operational excellence lives. So I want to transition a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about long span trusses, which are, of course, a really powerful system. They also come with a lot of risk, which I know if you are tuning in and you're adjacent to our industry, maybe you don't have a full understanding of that. Those of you who are component manufacturers or familiar with long span trusses obviously understand that risk well. As the span increases, the margin for misunderstanding really should decrease, right? So long span truss education in 2026 is really important. We have not put out education on this particular topic in many years, and things, of course, have changed over that time. The education is intentionally cross-functional. Designers, production leaders, field teams, so those who are installing on the job site, everyone is the same mental model. So when you look at it, because long span success doesn't happen, obviously in a silo, and gravity doesn't accept excuses or misunderstandings, this becomes even more important. So it's going to be a really impactful training. I'm excited to roll it out. Look for that probably mid 26, following some updates to TTT2 and TTT3, which will happen relatively early on in the year. One of the other focus areas for us will be on floor truss fire education. And we actually just came off of an incredible OQM in Napa, which I'll touch on a little bit here in just a minute. But, we're looking at fire performance, or floor truss fire performance, I should say. And it's a topic that is particularly timely, especially given the recent fire testing conducted jointly by SBCA and MITEC that really created some insight and opportunity for component manufacturers. We had a really phenomenal education session in Napa, and the education we're going to put out in 2026 is really going to expand upon that. The goal is obviously to explain some of the new test results, what it means, some adaptations, some things, some options that you're going to have as a component manufacturer, which create, of course, opportunity. We want to make sure that you're informed, you're prepared, you're confident. I think those kinds of informed conversations obviously lead to better outcomes. So that is the goal with our floor fire truss education that we will roll out likely midsummer. I mentioned I was going to touch on OQMs briefly, so I will do that. I think instead of talking specifically about an OQM, I really want to focus on the concept of live education, which is what happens at an OQM. So OQMs are an opportunity for education, networking, some really phenomenal conversations. But one of the things that I think is important for everyone to understand, if you've never been to an OQM, which of course is one of our open quarterly meetings, these are sessions, is a session where we can really sit down with industry experts on a variety of different topics for 45 minutes, and they can essentially brain dump. They can give you some of the most insightful information that you get an opportunity then to absorb, ask questions. Those questions, in most cases, continue as discussions thereafter, which is essentially leading to some really phenomenal networking as well. One session in particular that we did, of course, is the fire testing. We also did a session on ICC, the ICC code adoption process. We called it ICC in Action. Greg Greenlee, our technical director, kicked it off. And truly, I don't know how someone can make codes as hilarious as Greg made codes, but it was a phenomenal session to kick off our morning. We had people laughing, enjoying the morning cup of joe while they were getting insight into what the code adoption process looks like and how, kind of a practical map, if you will, for how component manufacturers can actually be involved. And I think a lot of people feel like codes happen to them when really, there's a process. Component manufacturers have a voice and you belong in that conversation. So for Greg to share sort of what the process looked like, he shared a video of, a proposal that they had made, which was originally, shut down or denied, that they came back and sort of argued for and really pushed and actually won. Those are the kinds of things that I think are really pertinent for us to understand. Those sessions at OQMs are the kind of education you can't necessarily absorb, recap. Being in the room for those types of sessions changes how you think, right? The questions at the end really impact the way a lot of people perceive what was just shared with them. There's a lot of aha moments. And for me, sitting in the back, it's really neat to see. This particular OQM recently in Napa was one that I found especially significant, not just in the education that we had, but the way it was received. Here is the B series, BCSI, and kind of wall panel education that we are going to loop in as well. Now, B series documents, those are in conjunction with BCSI, which was just rolled out. It's new. Was very exciting. It's been very popular. I think people really appreciate that, it's not a standalone training. It does accompany the BCSI guide, but it's meant as a supplement. And because it's so easy to access, you've got this in front of you. You can jump into any particular chapter and get some insight. The B series documents will look to do the same, and those will fall under that BCSI education. Wall panel education will be added as a chapter in BCSI. So when that's done, we will include that there as well, probably mid to later 2026. And last, but certainly not least, let's talk about one of the most exciting developments coming in 2026 that I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast. And that is our LMS crossover and integration. So here's kind of what that means. A learner logs into their company's LMS. So many of you are out there, you have your own LMS, which is a learning management system. And you log in and there might be some HR training, maybe some safety training. From there, you can actually access our SBCA education and training. And it will work the same as it currently does. So if you're a manager thinking, well, this is great, how do I, load education for those within my company, my organization, that I want to take these particular trainings, maybe a TTT, operations safety. It's going to function just as it does now, but within your LMS. A lot of the training that we have is very specialized. So again, going back to what I said initially, you may have an HR program and maybe some safety content in your own LMS, but it takes a lot to really build out some of these specific programs like a TTT. So you're now going to have access within your own LMS to assign that to a learner. So now let's talk about one of the most exciting developments for me in 2026, and hopefully for you as well. That's our LMS crossover and integration. So here's what that means. A learner logs into their company's LMS, and from there, they can access SBCA's education and training without having to log into a second system. You're all busy. You've got a million things going on. No longer will you have to remember a different login, password, those 2 minutes it takes to jump over, log into another system and wait for it to load are now nixed. So it's all happening as a single sign-on. Platforms connect. On the back end, progress and completions are still tracked. Managers retain oversight just as they have. They can enroll a learner in any training, whether it's free or paid. And then, of course, the data flows back and forth through a program that we use and then allows us to have some insight into what's working, what's not, if there are any problem areas, maybe a question that's misunderstood, and so on. And personally, I think this removes a lot of friction. It allows SBCA education to become part of internal training programs and not something extra. They don't see it as something that, something else that they have to do. And I think this is really how education scales without becoming a burden. So for me, it's a game changer in terms of adoption. Before I close and round out our podcast, I did want to mention that one of the things that we are going to start the planning phase for is a component executive certification. But most importantly, I think it is a time for us to identify the competencies a well-rounded component manufacturing executive needs. So those that are in some of these leadership positions, everything from the business and financial acumen, operations management, might be some design literacy, of course, safety and quality, but then some of these leadership concepts. This is about leadership development and succession planning when you really think about it, because the future of the industry depends on prepared leaders. And I think that's something that we have seen and heard as far as an ask for quite some time. So we're definitely looking at that certification and how we can make those within the association that much more successful and prepare them, of course, for what's to come. All right, here are the takeaways. So 2026, deeper expertise. We've got a lot of smarter integration. We are looping in. I think there are some stronger leadership pipelines and learning, of course, that fits how companies actually operate, which is most significant. If you're a member, this is your moment to engage, of course. If you are not, but you care about where the industry is going, I think it's very important that you pay attention. And if you want to stay ahead instead of reacting later, this really is where it starts. And that's a wrap. Thank you for tuning in, for joining us today. Thank you all out there for listening to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection. If you have enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, please like it and share it with others. Stay up to date and in the know by subscribing to Component Connection on whatever podcast platform you use most.
Thanks for listening to Component Connection, brought to you by SBCA. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, email us at podcast@sbcacomponents.com.